The letter arrived 3 days after we buried my father. It was completely inconspicuous, a white envelope with my name written in his unmistakable architect's handwriting. I found it sandwiched between bills and junk mail, as if it was deliberately trying to hide from the world, like everything important that my father always hid from me. His handwriting was so familiar and at the same time alien, like the last indelible connection with something that was already gone. My name is Avery, and until that moment, I thought I knew everything about my father. I was wrong. I stood in the kitchen of my tiny apartment, next to a cup of cold coffee, and looked at this envelope as if it could disappear if I just turned away. The morning sun deftly caught its edge, giving the paper a transparent glow. My fingers were shaking, and I could barely unwrap it, as if the very fact of its existence made me wonder if it might be better to leave everything in the past. 3 days of crying left me empty, but somehow this letter brought me back to normal. Honey, if you're reading this, it means I didn't find the courage to tell you this in person. I'm sorry for this, but what I'm going to share with you must remain between us. The words blurred before my eyes, and tears welled up again. I blinked them away, deciding to focus on my phone, but Mom's name flashed on the screen. I didn't pick up the phone, just like before. After the funeral, I couldn't stand a single conversation about how to grieve properly, or how Chloe handled it so much better. I've always put others first, and now that it's time for my grief, I couldn't afford it. Returning to the letter, I saw that something was waiting for me in the mailbox of the First National Bank, 247. The key was taped to the back of the page, and I froze when I saw it, a small silver key illuminated by light that deftly penetrated through the windows. It was secured with a transparent ribbon, slightly yellowed with age. It was strange, but at the same time logical. He had known for a long time that one day I would have to discover it. My phone rang again. It was Ethan. Hey baby, your mom's worried, call her back. I quickly declined the call. I'm working on something, we'll talk later, I replied without even thinking. The letter continued, I see you struggling to find your place, always putting everyone else first. You're a lot stronger than you think, Avery. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to let someone find their own way. The doorbell made me jump in surprise. I clutched the letter to my chest, as if trying to keep it a secret, and saw Chloe. She was perfectly assembled, as always. Mom probably sent her to check on me. I was silent until her heels clicked on the wooden floor. The hall was filled with her presence, and a heavy sense of guilt that I couldn't banish. Dad wanted me to find this before meeting the family, before facing Mom's plans for moving forward, and Chloe's scripted grief, as well as Ethan's well-intentioned but suffocating anxiety. When I locked the door of my apartment, I received another message from my mother saying that something appropriate was coming tonight. The Hendersons, we have to show them that we handle this with dignity. I smiled grimly at first. The bank drawer burned inside me, but dinner with them was inevitable, and somewhere between those two moments I had to find out exactly what my quiet, observant father was planning and why he decided to share it only with me. Henderson arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. They were dressed as if they were at a charity event, not a family dinner. I watched from the kitchen as Mom fussed over them in the hallway, her pearl necklace reflecting the light every time she laughed at their polite condolences. The trip to the bank was still throbbing in my head, but I forced myself to focus on arranging the plates with snacks. Just act normal, I kept telling myself, but normal seemed impossible after what I found there. You stormed through the kitchen in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Mom was looking for you, why aren't you dressed yet? I looked at my plain black trousers and blouse and wished I could have done more to please her. She sighed and held the wine opener past me. Do you know what Mom means by dressed up? Henderson's son is here, Jason, the investment banker I'm dating, she said, as if casually interjecting this remark. I reminded her, although lately this fact seemed more like a habit than a certainty. That's right, I say, but when talking about Ethan, he was asking about his father's will. He seems to be very interested in the details. My hands froze on the cheese plate. I asked, trying to hide my growing concern. Just everything, she replied, and at that moment Chloe leaned against the counter, studying me intently. It's strange that Dad didn't leave you anything special, isn't it? I mean, you've always been his favorite. Before I could answer, Mom burst into the kitchen like a storm. What are you doing hiding here? The Hendersons are waiting. She stopped, frowning, and looked at my outfit. Avery, I specially laid out this navy blue dress for you. I felt myself getting hot. Mom, as always, tried to control every detail, as if everything in this world was amenable to her plan. I swallowed a lump in my throat and said softly, I'm comfortable with this. My hand gripped the handle of the refrigerator, and for a moment I felt the air in the room become thick and viscous. Dad's letter suddenly made more sense. He must have known about the financial problems. He knew that Mom would try to maintain visibility at all costs, despite everything that happened behind closed doors. And now, weeks after his death, I began to realize that he wasn't just trying to hide these things from me. He wanted me to see them, so that I can find this letter before I meet with my family. Avery, I heard him say. Ethan appeared in the doorway, completely at ease in his tailored suit. He was so familiar, so calm and confident, but there was anxiety in his eyes. Do you need help? He asked, although I already realized that his question was more rhetorical. Ethan was always good at this, at appearing to be someone he wasn't. He came closer anyway, lowering his voice. Your mom is worried about you. We're all like that. You've been at a distance since the funeral. Without taking my eyes off the refrigerator, I answered, I'm fine. But Ethan didn't stop. He continued, because Chloe mentioned that you were asking questions about your father's finances. I set the plate down a little too hard. Why are you and Chloe discussing me? I thought, but I didn't say it out loud. His hand touched my waist, but it felt wrong somehow. I pulled away and said softly, maybe if you talk to me about what's bothering you, I'll. But then Mom's voice came from the dining room. The Hendersons are asking about your work at the community center. I gratefully headed there, glad to be interrupted, but as I passed by, I caught a glimpse of Ethan and Chloe exchanging glances. Their silent conversation turned my stomach. The key to the safe was heavy in my pocket, and I felt its coldness creep into my bones. My father's words echoed in my head. You don't owe your dreams to anyone, I repeated softly to myself as I entered the dining room. Everything seemed so artificially perfect, the beautifully appointed room, Mom's futile attempt to maintain this facade of normality, Chloe's desperate smile and her calculating charm. And now I understood what he meant. It wasn't just about money, it was about escape. My father wasn't just trying to leave me an inheritance, he wanted me to run away from all this. Mrs. Henderson smiled magnanimously. Tell us about your little charity work, she said, as if inviting me into a world where everything is arranged according to her rules. I sat down at the table, realizing that everyone was looking at me. Each of them wanted something different. Mom wanted to perform. Chloe wanted ammunition. Ethan wanted to, well, it was getting clearer by the minute, but at that moment I realized that for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I wasn't going to please any of them. The safe felt heavier than it should have when I put it on a small table in a separate viewing room of the bank. My hands were shaking slightly as I inserted the key. My father's words, spoken at dinner 2 weeks ago, echoed in my head. The quiet ones see that everything is inside, honey. I turned the key and a thick manila envelope opened in front of me. I pulled out a smaller white envelope with my name on it. With trembling hands, I opened it and read, My dear Hay. The door opened suddenly, and I tried to hide the papers, but it was too late. Chloe stood there, her perfect makeup not hiding the rage that was beating in her eyes. I knew that. She hissed, her words getting right into my soul. I followed you here after I saw the bank number on your phone last night. She took a step forward, and I felt her gaze boring into the papers in my hands. This is a private room, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, as if Dad had actually framed me, leaving the others to drown. But Chloe didn't stop, she came closer, her eyes never leaving what I was holding. Mom is about to lose everything, and you're hoarding secrets here? Her voice was low, angry, as if she was clinging to me. It wasn't easy. It was more than I could stomach. I tried to speak, but her words just flooded me. "It's not what you think," I whispered, but she didn't believe me, and neither did everyone else. I hardly heard her go on, her words raining down like small stones being thrown into my soul. Dad played favorites until the very end, perfectly. Avery, who understood him, she spat out the words like poison. I was stuck trying to deal with Mom's breakdowns and keep everything together at the same time. Keeping everything together was all I tried to do, because it was important to her that everything looked perfect, flawless, as always. And I couldn't take it anymore. Her face flickered for a moment, then hardened again. "I do not know what you are talking about." Her eyes began to sparkle, but behind this light there was fear, guilt. But she wasn't going to stop. "I saw you two at dinner last night," she whispered. "Views. Whispers. How long has this been going on?" I felt the air tighten in my chest. It wasn't because of Ethan. She reached for the papers, and I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "It's about family," I said, remembering Dad's words. They were burning in my head. "You don't owe anyone your dreams." He was right. I said this to her, about the family. About how you and Mom turned everything into a competition, about how Dad saw it and tried to at least protect someone. Chloe laughed bitterly. Her laughter was like a dagger. Protect? Hiding the money and lying, giving me a choice. She pursed her lips contemptuously, but in her eyes I saw the very struggle that was bubbling restlessly in my chest. The bank manager appeared at the door, interrupting our argument. "It's all right, ladies, it's all right." We said it in unison, automatically, as always, because our whole life was about keeping up appearances. I didn't even realize how we were playing all the roles in this play. "Show me what's in these papers," Chloe asked, her voice low but sharp as a knife blade. "When he leaves, or I'll tell Mom everything," she added. I looked at my sister. I really looked at her. Behind her perfect facade, I saw something familiar, the same trapped feeling I've been fighting all my life. And I said, "Do you know what to tell her?" "Tell everyone." "Because I'm done. I'm done pretending that everything is fine." But this is not the case. I gathered up my papers and stood up. Chloe grabbed my hand, her manicured nails digging into my skin, but I didn't back down. "You can't just leave." Her voice was strangled but authoritative. "We are a family." I turned to her. Her hand remained on mine, but I gently removed it, as if I were pushing away an object. "Yes," I replied quietly. "And maybe that's the problem." Ethan's face changed, and I immediately realized that a complex kaleidoscope of feelings appeared in his eyes: surprise, calculation, and guilt. It all happened too fast, like a chain reaction built up in his head, in his hands, and then in his words. He leaned forward, and his voice became quieter, almost a whisper. "Ward, your father left you money, didn't he?" "There are a lot of them." I froze, not knowing how to react. I thought about Dad's letter, about his quiet observations that he had been making for years, when he wrote about how this moment would surely come, and how he could not have prevented it. He could have understood that this was exactly what was going to happen, that my mother, with her vanity and cool pursuit of social status, was about to lose everything. Ethan continued without letting me look away. "Home, social status, all of this. You could help if you wanted to, like you helped Chloe." His voice was soft, but with a hint of accusation, as if it was my obligation. He even showed courtesy by flinching, as if he didn't believe what he was saying. But the words remained painfully precise. "Chloe was vulnerable after your father died, wasn't she?" It was not a question, but a statement. My voice remained even, which surprised even me, but inside everything was starting to break. His words sounded like a reproach, but I knew he was right. It wasn't fair. I couldn't let him use my father's death as an excuse. My phone vibrated and I saw a message from my mom. "The bank called about the mortgage. Where are you?" I switched the conversation to silent mode, but Ethan continued to reach across the table, holding out his hand. "We can fix this, Avery." All that. Just tell me about the money. Let me help you figure out what to do about it. Those were the same words he said to me last year when I got promoted, when I inherited my grandmother's jewelry. He always offered to help with the management of my resources, as if there was nothing complicated, nothing special about it. There's nothing to find out, he said, but I stood up and answered, I've already decided. Ethan gripped my wrist tightly, his fingers firm and confident, as if he knew I was going to give up anyway. You're not thinking clearly, Avery. Your father's death, stress. Let me handle this. His words penetrated me, and I felt a tightness in my chest from the pain. Memories surfaced of Dad quietly slipping me extra money at college graduation while Mom fussed over Chloe's outfit, saying, You have good instincts, honey, trust me. I pulled my hand out of his grip, and the question came out of me by itself. How long have you and Chloe been planning this? Was it before or after my father's death? Ethan's silence was a loud enough response. My phone vibrated again. Now it was a message from my mom, in which her voice was already shaking with hysteria. If you have money, you have to help. This is what Dad would like. But I knew it wasn't true. Dad spent years watching and planning for at least one of us to break free. And now I was standing in front of Ethan, realizing that he didn't understand the depth of it. I glanced at his confident face, ready for another change of tactics. I loved you, I said, not waiting for an answer. Does it even matter? My phone vibrated one last time, interrupting the lingering silence that filled the room. Chloe, don't make me tell my mom everything I know, I smiled, thinking about the evidence safely stored in 3 different places. After typing the answer, I sent it, thinking about how easily she could be exposed. Come on, she wrote briefly, mentally preparing for the next step. I have something to say to her too. At that moment, I was collecting the last things from my desk when the door burst open and Chloe burst into the room, brandishing her phone like a weapon. Congratulations, have you decided to quit your job? Her voice echoed loudly and furiously down the hall. I continued to wrap my desk photos in newspaper, ignoring her screams. As soon as I closed the door, she didn't hesitate to slam it so hard that the blinds rattled. Ethan was standing in the doorway, pretending to be worried, but I didn't believe him. Are you crazy? Chloe was shouting again. My eyes were fixed on an old letter from my father. I carefully put it in the box, unable to distract myself from the fact that she continued to yell. Mom had a breakdown, the bank is threatening to close, and are you running away? Her words penetrated me. I wonder how you found out so quickly. I glanced at Ethan, almost hostile, as if he was hiding something. He wouldn't be able to look me in the eye if he knew that I understood his role in this game. You have $2 million, Avery, $2 million that can save our family, and you decide to leave us. Chloe's voice became ragged. My hands froze on my father's old letter, and I clutched it to me, as if trying to hold on to something important. How do you know the exact amount? The silence in the room became deafening. Chloe's face was flushed with rage, and Ethan shifted uncomfortably, looking somehow guilty. Did you go through my apartment? I asked in a whisper, and the realization hit me like lightning. That explained everything. When I was at the cafe with Ethan, he insisted that we meet there to make sure I wasn't hiding anything. Now everything was becoming clear. I should have known Ethan had played his part, but that didn't suit me. You should have known how much I was worth, I said, almost forgetting that it was a question. Betray us? Chloe obviously couldn't contain her emotions. Her voice broke. You don't understand what Mom is going through, what I'm going through. Dad left us nothing but debts and secrets. I was silent, looking at their faces. At their questioning look. Did you even look for his letter in my apartment? The one that explains why he did it? I knew the answer, but I didn't want to voice it. No, of course not you, I whispered, realizing that they were only ready to get information. My phone rang again, but I ignored it. No matter what Dad said, the reasons Ethan came forward so much, playing the go, between it was all secondary. The reality was that their family needed help, and they had the opportunity to provide for themselves. That's not important, I said, pulling out my laptop and typing quickly. I looked around at Chloe and Ethan and looked up. You're right, family matters. I turned the screen towards them, which had dozens of screenshots. Their secret meetings, text messages. The words hit harder than I expected, like the impact of a collapsed wall. 2 years of my life, all this calculation, everything that seemed so real and inevitable, was now collapsing under the weight of revelations. Avery, Ethan reached out to me. His hand wasn't as steady as before, but he was still trying to catch my eye. It all started so long ago, and now everything has suddenly become clear, like the light that falls on the rain-drenched glass. Save it, I said, pressing the button to enter the bank. Find out the truth about Mom's missing money, and you can also explain to her why her golden daughter bled out of her account. I didn't have time to finish. Chloe rushed forward, but Ethan managed to catch her arm, stopping her frantic rush. You're ruining everything, he whispered. No, I took the box of things and stepped aside. Everything was decided. Dad saw it coming like a storm, and he couldn't do anything. His words now rang in my head like echoes reflected from the walls of an empty house. Manipulation, lies, all this. He protected me when I left. Chloe stood there, not knowing what to do, and Ethan, at that moment, also seemed to have lost the very essence of what was happening. Mom will never forgive you for this, Chloe called to me, but I didn't turn around. I thought about Dad's letter, which was safely hidden like the last treasure. Sometimes love means letting people make their own choices, darling, even when that choice hurts. My father's words were now echoing in my head. My phone vibrated again, a new message from the community center. I hadn't even had time to answer when I remembered that I had something more important to solve. It wasn't just a full-time position, it was a chance for something more. With each passing moment, I felt something else bursting out of me, something that had been blocked for a long time, but was now free as air. I typed in the answer as I passed Ethan, who was still trying to hold on to the situation. But for the first time since Dad died, I felt free. The quiet ones don't just see everything, they change everything. The family home seemed completely different the last time I looked at it. The rain pounding on the windows seemed to take part in this transformation. Mom was sitting in the living room, the phone pressed to her ear. She was probably chatting with friends from the society, trying to figure out why her accounts were suddenly frozen. I couldn't blame her, she didn't see the side of this world that was hiding behind the doors. But now I've seen it. The phone crackled in my hands again, and it was no longer something accidental. I would have to deal with the fraud department at the bank. But before I could do that, I had to face what was worse, what hadn't had time to end yet. As soon as I entered the house, I immediately realized that Chloe was here. Her designer coat hung in its usual place, dripping onto her mother's precious treasure, as if hinting that time was inexorably running out. The sound of footsteps echoed across the parquet floors, but the room was so quiet that every sound seemed almost the embodiment of their thoughts. We can fix this, Ethan said, the bank just needs to shut up. Chloe snapped. It's all your fault. If you had done your job well. I turned around, and as I rounded the corner, the room fell silent. Mom was standing at the head of the table, clutching a stack of papers in her hands. The printouts of the evidence that I sent her. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steely. Sit down, Avery, she said. I didn't leave her like you do, I said softly, feeling the words barely hold in my throat. Mom looked up, and her gaze was instantly sharp as steel. Suddenly, abruptly, she asked, Is it true? Are you leaving? I thought about working at the community center, about this opportunity to start all over again, to break the vicious circle that was dragging us into the abyss. Yes, I could leave and start a new life. But in response to her question, I just nodded softly. Then you're not my daughter. Her voice was so low that it was almost lost among the words. But there was something unbearably heavy in those words. Mom, as always, tried to keep control, but I felt that there was a void in her eyes that she was trying to fill with rage. If you leave now, you won't come back, she said, and it hurt me to hear her. There was no point in continuing this endless game, and I stood up. Dad left me another letter. I pulled it out of my pocket and gave it to my mom. We all stood motionless, and I looked at their faces, waiting for an explanation. Then I took out my phone and showed them the banking application. "Do you want to know what it says?" I said, my fingers flickering across the screen. In a few touches, I transferred enough money to cover all my mom's legitimate debts, not the ones from gambling, not those secret credit cards, but only the mortgage and basic bills. I kept everything that was left for myself. "Whatever you get," I said with a firmness that shocked even me. "Everything else will go somewhere where it can be used to help others. I won't feed another illusion." Chloe tried to intervene, but her words got stuck in mid-sentence when she realized that I had no intention of backing down. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already have," I replied, heading for the door. Before I left, I turned around one last time. "When Dad saw all this, he saw how you use me, use him, use each other. And he made sure that at least one of us got free," I said, and turned around without waiting for an answer. Mom called me, but I was already out in the rain. The wind blew across my face, and there was something free in the air, something that I had lost so long ago. My phone vibrated. It was the director of the community center. "When can you start?" "A message has arrived." I smiled as I felt myself being pulled forward. Through tears, I typed the answer. "Tomorrow." "I'm ready." I pressed send, and despite everything that was left behind, the feeling of freedom was now my companion. In the rearview mirror, I saw the family home disappearing, getting smaller and smaller, overshadowed by those dark windows full of secrets that I had left behind. I no longer had to make sure that the windows of the community center shone with a warm light at dusk. When I finished unpacking my new office a week after I left my family, the world seemed different, clearer, easier. And so, as I was sitting in my new chair, a knock on the door made me freeze. Ethan was standing in the doorway. His hands were in his pockets, and he looked more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. "Did you let me in?" he asked. His voice was strained, as if he was again looking for an excuse for something he could no longer control. "We need to talk," he said, and my hands instinctively clenched into fists. "About what?" I asked, barely able to contain my anger. But Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he squeezed out words that made me feel as if the ground had fallen out from under my feet. "Your mother is in the hospital," he said, and the whole world suddenly shrank. I pulled out my phone and turned on the recording, not feeling the slightest regret. Ethan's voice, clear and confident, discussed their plan to gain access to their father's accounts. Chloe, standing next to me, agreed to use our relationship for manipulation, believing that she could control me, as if I were just a pawn in her game. "That's your idea of what a family should be, right?" Mom's face turned pale, as if someone had suddenly pulled the ground out from under her feet. Chloe stepped forward, stretched out her hand, trying to grab the phone, but I managed to linger. My hand held the device tightly. I knew that the bank already had all the necessary copies, and the district attorney had the same thing. I met the gaze of each of them in turn, and I didn't need to add words. It was all over. I left them with the last solution. "Are you going to send your sister to jail?" Mom whispered, but I didn't answer. I wasn't going to protect her anymore. Now her choice is her responsibility. I turned to Ethan, and he suddenly moved toward me, grabbing my hand, with an expression on his face that didn't bode well. "You don't understand what you're doing," he whispered, his words sounding threatening. "The people I work with have money involved in this." I pulled away from his grip when a new figure entered the door. Sarah, one of the clients of our center, was standing in the doorway with two policemen. I turned to them, not hiding my relief. I called them when I saw them coming in. Ethan stepped back, letting go of my hand, his face blank. I looked at them all, feeling neither pain nor guilt. It was all a foregone conclusion. "Are you okay, Avery?" one of the officers asked. His voice was quiet, but I felt respect in it, that there was neither condemnation nor regret in these words. "This is what Dad wanted," I said, watching their faces crumble, their worlds crumble. "This is not revenge, not punishment. It's just the truth. This is a chance to build something honest out of the ashes of all your lies." One of the officers took a step forward. "We need to ask you a few questions about the financial fraud complaint you filed." Mom, sitting in an armchair, closed her eyes, and all the pretense disappeared. She no longer tried to defend her image, which she had always built so carefully. We both knew that what I was doing was not protection for our family, but for its illusions. Mom was not protecting the family, but her image of this family, created for others. Dad, in turn, always protected me. He taught me that a family can be different, real. When the officers took Ethan away, Chloe was sobbing next to our exhausted mother. I looked around the center, thinking about the women we helped. We saved lives, we gave them a chance. Dad left us not money, but the courage to break free, to get out of this vicious circle. "Miss Thompson," Sarah said, pausing in the doorway. "We have an evening group, we have to decide what to do." I looked at her, and there was a reflection of hope in her eyes. I straightened my shirt, stood up and said, "Tell them we're just getting started." As I walked, Mom and Chloe silently stared at my back. There was no regret in their eyes, only an understanding that all this was inevitable. Dad always knew that sometimes love is not a hold, but a release. A year has passed. I stood in front of the newly expanded wing of the community center, watching as workers set up a plaque. "Robert Thompson Memorial Center, New Beginnings." The writing on the blackboard was simple, but for me it carried the full force of his lesson. "I saw your interview." Chloe went on to talk about the center's mission, how we help women avoid toxic relationships and find their strength. She paused, and her gaze became distant, as if she was losing touch with reality before continuing. It reminded me of Dad's letters. Her voice sounded uncertain but determined. "Which you found?" "They were all at Mom's," he wrote to her too, trying to help her understand what she was doing to us, to herself. Chloe fell silent, and her words hung in the air like invisible shackles binding her. She nervously shrugged her shoulder and continued, "She never opened them until after the trial." Sarah touched my arm, as if to confirm that this hard truth lay on both of us. I couldn't contain my feelings. It was all too much. "I'm not ready to forgive everything," I said quietly, not even hoping for an answer. "I know that." She interrupted me, not expecting forgiveness. And then, suddenly, Chloe pulled something out of her bag, a familiar envelope. It was the same color, the same size. The envelope I found among Mom's things. It was addressed to both of us. "I didn't open it," she said softly. My hands were shaking slightly as I took the letter. There was only one photo inside. Just one thing. Chloe and I, the kids on the swing, laughing as if there was no pain, no fear, no expectations, no destructive pressure that came with age. Dad was pushing us both to make us feel happy. That was the moment before all this. "Turn it over," Chloe whispered. I did as she said, and saw my father's handwriting, which wrote, "My girls, do they remember this moment before the expectations, before the competition, before the fear separated you? Love is not counting, but pushing each other to joy." I felt tears welling up in my eyes when I read the last words. He knew we'd end up here. I realized that not only was I breaking free, but she was too, in her own way. We do it all in our own way. And suddenly Chloe, noticing my thoughts, broke the silence. "After all, I have an interview next week." She smiled. "In a shelter for women, they need administrative help. You're staying in social services, right?" I nodded. There was something in her voice that I hadn't heard in so long. Sincerity. "You know, it turns out that helping people feel better is much easier than manipulating them," she added, as if to confirm her words. Outside, through the window, I saw a group of women coming out of the center. They were on their way to life skills classes. They walked confidently, high, with their heads held high. They were free. Free, as Dad always wanted us to be. I said quietly, "We are creating a new support group. Family Trauma and Recovery." On Tuesday evening, when Chloe reappeared at the office, her eyes met mine. We didn't need words to understand each other. "Yes, yes," she agreed. "I'll think about it." She turned to leave, but stopped. Her voice was serious. "That day in your office, when everything fell apart, you could have destroyed us completely, but you didn't. This is not what my father taught me about power." She nodded and added, with a new confidence in her voice, "I'll see you on Tuesday." I watched her leave. Now she was not the sister who had once helped to separate our family. She was different. Not healed, not forgiven, but changed. And I was changing too. My phone vibrated. I saw a message from my mom, and on the screen was a photo from a newspaper, where the headline in large letters read, "Robert Thompson Memorial Center is open." There was a comment under the photo, "Robert would be proud." I sat in silence, letting this moment pass through me.